So very excited about the all-new XR10 Pro 160. This is the G2, the all-new, updated, has new firmware, a couple hardware changes. The exciting hardware changes are now the speed control itself has reverse voltage protection, so if you accidentally hook it up backwards, if you're running the standard power cap, that'll get damaged, but the speed control itself will survive. Also has updated BEC hardware as well as some firmware changes in the way of more adjustability for the turbo and a couple other things as well. The external switch can be unplugged, and some of the applications you need an outside switch, so that's an option now. But all the stuff that you've come to love is still there. The nice aluminum heavy-duty case, the interface with the dedicated programming port, Wi-Fi Express still works with this, LCD programming box works with this. So we'll take a look at wiring up a power connector, plugging in the Wi-Fi Express, the LCD programming box, and kind of all the cool new stuff that the XR10 Pro 160 G2 has to offer. Alright, so first things first, before you can get started, you have to install a connector. I am going to end up putting this into my no prep drag racing car because that's where I have my current XR10 160, so I'm going to do a little side by side. Unfortunately, maybe not going to be the ideal situation because I've run that thing pretty maxed out, and the max settings are real similar, I think, overall. But I'm going to put the plug on here first. I use XT60s right now on most of my two-cell vehicles. I haven't really come up short with these yet. The trick to any plug is make sure it's the name brand one, and these say AMAS with the little registration trademark thing, whatever. When I do most power plug situations, you try to trim power leads down as much as you can, and only make them as long as they need to be. I usually go half or less because that is a ton of wire. So I like to keep the red indicator guy on here just for safety. Never hurts to have the little wire guy protector on there. Now, 12 gauge wire is going to be a little bit tricky to work with, so yeah, I have to have a nice hot iron. Topics that I always get are how hot is your iron, what size, that's sort of fun stuff. And I use the good old fashioned, I think this is like a 4mm chisel tip, and it runs probably up around 750, 800 degrees Fahrenheit. This one doesn't have the C conversion on it, but very hot because of the lead-free solder that you end up using these days. Is a little high temperature, I guess is the easy way to look at it. And it helps to keep things flowing real nicely and solder joints clean. One thing, you always want to make sure that you tin your wire. Some people, they'll put the wire on there and just apply solder, and they think that's good enough. I like to tin my wires as little as possible, but still enough to get some good conformal solder, I guess you'd say, flow across everything to keep the wires nice and tight. But one of the important things is that solder is not a conductor as much as it is something that just holds the wire in place. So you want to kind of use enough solder but not too much. Your wire should not be floating in the ball of solder. You want to get the surface of your wire kind of touching the surface of your plug, and the solder will just be going around it to hold it in place, if that makes any sense. These guys, I really like these XT60s with these because I don't have to use shrink wrap anymore, so that's great. Lay this guy down. I'm going to tin the surface just a little bit, not too much, just to make sure that everything flows nicely. And you say what you will about soldering techniques and all that fun stuff. The way I've been doing this for a while now seems to work, and I don't get a lot of the weird shutdown problems that people get. The using genuine connectors and basic, simple solder techniques to keep things right. Now, this is, I'm sorry, a little tricky to see, but what I'm doing, I got the tinned surface of the plug. I got a nice tinned wire with probably a little bit too much solder on there, but that's all right. And as I apply the heat, I'm going to be pushing the wire down into the cup and maybe rolling it just a little bit, or maybe just placing it down in there so that the wire itself gets down to the metal surface and isn't floating up above the solder. And then I usually try to hit the edge of the iron, just a little bit of solder. Still got, this is positive, positive. And then get down like that, it'll flow. Wire starts to get down in there, and you kind of push it into the pocket so that it's nice and flat on the metal surface. And you can see that the wire itself is down, you know, on the connector, not floating in the solder. And I have good uniform solder flow around the rest of it, so there's no loose strands of wire or anything funny like that. And this side I'm going to do the same thing. This one has a little bit less solder on it. There you go, focus. This one has a little bit less solder on it, so it'll be a little bit cleaner probably. And normally this is all something you kind of do without the camera right in the middle of it, so you can get your face down next to it, but this isn't too terrible. Again, I like to hit the iron with just a little bit of solder right before I get up in there so that it starts to flow. A little back and forth action, wire starts to sink, you push it in, and then remove the heat. And that guy is sitting down in there, and that is nice and uniform. There you go. And then this guy clicks up in there. Alright, so there you have it, XT60 installed. In most of the vehicles that I'm going to run, this guy is going to sit right adjacent to it, and for now, I'm leaving the stock power capacitor on there until I get my hands on some of the new non-polarized power capacitors, because those you can hook up backwards and it doesn't matter because everybody loves them. So next thing I want to make sure that I do, because we're going to go through and show how everything operates, is solder a motor on. And with a censored setup, you have to have ABC and ABC on here. This is marked, these are marked. Blue is A, yellow is B, orange is C. Bring your own, or what my buddy says is blueberry. What was it? I don't remember. So these come pre-tinned with some lead-free, very high-temperature solder, and for the purposes of this video, I'm going to solder these right on there so that we can see what that looks like. Now, if I'm doing a motor on a bench, I like to make the motor so it doesn't roll around. A set of pliers works great for that. You can use, like, some needle nose as well with a rubber band so that stays, but I like to use my wire strippers because they lock into place and the handle stays shut, so that's awesome. So again, same hot iron to do all this with. I got to tin these guys just a little bit so that everything flows nicely. And you see, when you get solder balls like that, that usually means the solder's a little, or the iron's a little bit too hot for the solder. And because this is good old-fashioned American leaded solder, it is a little lower temperature than the lead-free solder that we're trying to work with here. So when I go to solder these guys on, I want to make sure that I get a good amount of solder on my iron tip so that it flows nicely with the lead-free solder. And then the trick is kind of give it a little side by side and roll the wire so that it slides down through everything. One more, and that should be it. Oh, it's hot. Oh, this big honking wire carries a lot of heat. But as you can see, I don't know if you can see that super good, but it is uniform. You got no seams or edges that are showing. Everything is flowing around nicely as far as the edge of the solder joint goes. So do that all over again. And then on the side here, I have a sponge that has some water on it, and that's what that sound is. And that is the action of wiping the buildup of everything off the tip of the iron in the sponge. And the reason you use the sponge is because it cools the solder that's on that it's dirty and makes it fall off into the sponge. Pro tip, if you put a couple cuts in your sponge, a lot of people they don't have their original sponge that came with their iron, so you steal one from the sink while you're doing dishes. If you put a couple slits in it, it helps catch the solder in the dirt and falls into the slits and doesn't get your iron super dirty, or your sponge super dirty, because it falls down inside instead. Alright, so last wire. Again, you see when the iron's nice and hot, that doesn't really take very much effort or time. Everything flows real nicely, and you only burn your finger a little bit. So this setup will run, hybrid or sensorless, but we like to run everything censored so that we can use all the features of the speed control, turbo, boost, all that fun stuff. Because for the no prep drag racing, you get the rig set up right. It's kind of unlimited power capabilities. Get my sensor wire plugged in. And now we are ready to do basic setup, calibration, all that fun stuff. Okay, so this is going to be basic calibration of any of the one-button speed controls that only have a power button and no switch. They all pretty much work the same. To start the process, you plug in the battery. You want to be connected to the throttle channel, which is number 2 on a receiver, and that receiver should be already bound and set up and working with your radio system. The process is very straightforward. Battery pack is fully charged. You press and hold the button down. The light that you can't hardly see because my finger's covering it starts to flash. You're going to set the neutral, tap the button, go to full throttle, tap the button again, then go to full reverse or brakes, tap the button again. It beeps once, twice, 3 times, and then when it gets done, it goes back to default modes and you get normal operation. That's basic calibration. That is a very important step. If you plug everything in and it happens to work, that's okay. You still want to do this calibration process. Okay, so next up, you've done the calibration and now you want to do some setting changes. You can do that using the LCD programming box plugged into the programming port or with the Wi-Fi Express plugged into the programming port. We could do either way, but I'm going to show you with the Wi-Fi Express. This way we can run through a firmware update also. So main thing with this process is before you open the app, you want to make sure that the app's not open. You close all your apps and everything like that. Then you'll turn on the speed control first. I unplug the fan so that we don't have to listen to it whirring, but the light's on. Normally the fan would be running. And then you're going to go to your phone settings, into your connections, into Wi-Fi, and you're going to connect to your HW Wi-Fi link there. Once that's connected, it'll probably give you a notification that there's no internet. Like that. You don't need to worry about that. Just wait till that goes away. Because if you change anything there, it may want to jump off of this network because your phone's going to try to check your email. So if that starts to happen, you need to put your phone in airplane mode and make sure that it stays on your Wi-Fi Express link. So now we got that connected in the phone settings. We can go ahead and open the app. And if you ever open the app before you do this, you're going to have to start the process over. So I can open up the app. And the next thing I need to do, if I touch buttons, it's going to give me errors. I got to touch this little grayed out ESC icon in the upper right hand corner, and that's going to get the two of them talking to each other. And if there is a new firmware available, it'll let me know. I say okay, and we're going to just jump in and do that firmware update right now. This speed control is brand new from pre-production samples, so it has stuff that doesn't even exist. It lets me know that there's a newer version, everything's connected, and all I do is tap update. Are you sure you want to? Yes, I'm sure. Make sure that remove the propellers or wheels and ensure the Wi-Fi is always operational, because if anything, gets disconnected, never lock the screen or switch off other applications. So it doesn't want you to do anything to your phone because that can obviously cause some errors. You hit OK, and away the process goes, and it's a very not fast process, we'll say. It takes some time. There we go. That's 1%. I'm going to set this down, and we'll fast forward now. 98, 99, 100. Update complete. ESC needs to be restarted. It automatically restarts itself. Please wait. You hit OK. It loads the data. And then we can go back and do some parameter changes. So let's take a look at the parameters and what they all mean. One very important thing to note, that when you do the firmware update, you need to do the calibration of the speed control again just to make sure. It's super quick and easy, so we're just going to hammer through that real quick. I got the fan unplugged, but you'll still be able to see what's going on. You press and hold the button. It starts to blimp out. Easy for me to say. You're at neutral with the radio. You tap the button. Beep once, you go full throttle, hold it there and tap. Beeps twice, full reverse, hold it there and tap, 3 beeps, and then it's completed. And then just to make sure, you make sure motor runs, and that is turning counterclockwise because that's the default setting. Race car speed control, the reverse will not work until we make some setting changes, and we'll do that next. So we've done basic install, we did calibration so that we make sure everything works. We did a firmware update to get everything up to date, and after you do a firmware update, it's important to do the calibration again, which we just did. Now we've got our Wi-Fi Express connected back in. We're going to connect and go through what all the settings do. So first thing I do is turn on the speed control, then I go to my phone's settings, I go to connections, I go to Wi-Fi, I select the Wi-Fi link. If you've never connected it before, your password is 1234567 until you change it. It'll give you these notifications that it has no internet. You wait for that to go away, and then you can go back and open up your Hobbywing link. That will pop open, and make sure I get this angle. You have to touch the little speed control icon right there so that it starts to connect or load the data. And once that happens, we've already done the firmware update, so we know that's up to date. You go into parameters, and that will let you pick any of the profiles that are there. We're going to start out with that one, our 0 timing. Very cool. This is the latest firmware for the XR10 Pro 160 G2, the latest rendition of our flagship racing speed control. Loads the data, and then we get all of our cool stuff here, and this is where we can make the changes, and we'll talk about what each of these do. So your running mode is set by default to forward with brake, so that's normal race mode. If you want to have reverse on, you'll set that forward reverse with brake, and if rock crawl mode is what you're looking for, that's forward and reverse. So, because I'm going to run this in my dragster, we need a little bit of reverse, I'm going to turn that on. Max reverse force, that's so you can turn down the reverse speed without having to adjust your radio, and that's very helpful for race cars because you never really want to go full speed reverse, so I'm leaving that alone. The voltage cutoff allows you to change the actual voltage per cell setting. You have a wide range of stuff. I like default, it's nice and safe, so I'll leave that alone. I'm going to leave my ESC thermal protection and my motor thermal protection on for safety first, but you can raise those up one setting or turn them off completely. A lot of racers like to turn that stuff off all the way. BEC voltage is the power to the receiver and the servo, so you can adjust that in 0.1 increments from as low as 5 volts all the way up to 7. Where'd it go? 7.4. So I'm going to leave it at 6 because that's more than enough for my stuff. Remote on off. I turn that off because we end up holding the brake on a lot and you'll turn the speed control off, but that is the feature where you hold the brakes on and it'll turn the vehicle off. So I want that off. I want full censored mode, and my vehicle uses normal rotation motor. So that's a new feature in the XR10 Pro. This is our first 10 scale speed control that has the motor rotation option for the mid-motor vehicles or the backwards transmission stuff. So I know a lot of people have been waiting for that. Throttle control section. Now, throttle rate control is how quickly the speed control reacts to your trigger inputs. So the higher that is, the more linear it is. I like nice linear throttle. So does everybody. So it defaults all the way up. Throttle curve, I want linear. You can get a customized one as well, and you can monkey with all this and get yourself a custom one. I don't really ever am a big fan of that, so I'm not going to mess with my throttle curve. Neutral range is your deadband zone between throttle and brakes or reverse. So if you're real shaky on the trigger or your throttle pot on your radio is worn out, neutral range will make your drag brakes and things like that more consistent. Coast is like a run-on feature. So a lot of the folks, so when you get off the throttle, if the motor decelerates at all, it upsets the vehicle. Coast lets you adjust that so that that won't decelerate. It kind of lets the motor run on. Not a ton of applications use it, but if you get in those real tricky situations, that's what that's for. So most of the time, leave that turned off. Your PWM drive frequency. Now this is the duty cycle that the speed control uses to actually operate the motor. Lower frequency is more aggressive feel. Higher frequency is going to be smoother and more efficient overall. And it also goes all the way up to 32K now, and you can do customized drive frequency rates so that you can change your frequency depending on where your throttle is. Now that is crazy. So at low throttle, you're going to have low frequency for very smooth response, or if you wanted to be, or low throttle for very aggressive, and you can go high frequency so it's very smooth, and then you could gradually make it more and more as you went through. So this allows you to do all of that very trick if you wanted to get real crazy with frequencies. I'm not going to mess with that right now, but later on I will definitely do that. Put that back. I'm going to start out with 32K for my drag race stuff because that's as close, that's higher than what we were at before. Softening value and softening range. Now this is like a current limiter. If it's real hard to drive, like let's say for me, the first time I used it was in four-wheel drive touring car with rubber tire with a 5.0 turn motor, like very quick setup. And the car was real hard for me to kind of feather in throttle. So softening value allows you to adjust how much it takes away the power, how much it softens everything, if you will. And then the range adjusts how much of the throttle range from zero throttle into it you get to have. And for drag racing, because that's what I'm putting this in, again, it's not going to need any of that. But if you get into slick track situations or you have a hard time with throttle feel, softening is what you're going to want to mess with. Brake control, a lot of the same stuff, they just apply to the brakes. Brake rate, sorry, I'm reading ahead of myself. Drag brake is brakes at neutral. So when you lift to let off the throttle and return the throttle to neutral, that's the brakes that get applied automatically. Brake force is exactly that. It's how strong the brakes are. You can turn it down on the speed control so that no matter how much brakes you give it in the radio, it only gives it that much brakes. Initial brake force, this is when you first touch the brake side of things, you can make it higher than what the drag brake value is. And what that does is allows it to that very first touch of the brakes to make it snap or respond a little harder. If that's the same as the drag brake, when you first touch it, it'll just be a gradual normal increase of brakes. But if you need it to be a little snappier, that's what that initial brake force is for. Brake rate control is like the throttle rate, same thing. Higher that is, the more linear, and all the way up is linear, and that's what everybody likes. Brake curve, same thing. You can get real crazy and customizable with that, or you can run normal linear. And then brake frequency, same thing. This is going to be very fun for you folks who like to mess with your brakes, because you'll be able to have soft and aggressive and everything in between for brake frequencies. So that will be very, very tunable and very awesome. The brake, I gotta put those back to normal. I'm going to run my brake frequency cranked all the way up for maximum smoothness. And brake control, there's traditional, hybrid, and linear. I have only ever run things on traditional, so I don't really have a good explanation for what these all do. I will get some information on that for sure. Boost, timing, turbo, what is the timing section? There's two types of timing that a speed control can apply, and what timing is, it's an electronic advance or overdrive of the motor. Boost timing allows you to apply timing through a certain RPM range. Turbo timing allows you to apply timing after full throttle. And these timing scenarios have different ways that they get applied, but boost timing, you have an amount of timing. You have the boost timing where it's the timing activation, and you can set that to automatic so the speed control will figure it out, or you can set it to the RPM, and that's the two different triggers, if you will, for boost. If you want to have the ultimate control over, you set it to RPM, and then these values are the start value is where it starts applying whatever your boost timing is, and the boost end is when it's going to finish putting all that timing in. So that's the range of the RPM that tries to dump all that boost timing in there. Now, turbo timing, same idea. It's still an overdrive of the motor, but this only happens after full throttle. And turbo delay is how long after full throttle. Turbo increase rate is how quickly the speed control is going to try to dump in the timing after you get to full throttle. And turbo decrease rate is when you let off the throttle, how quickly the speed control is going to remove all of that timing, because it affects how the motor decelerates as well. So all of this is very confusing, and it's got its whole own video that still applies today that I will put a link in the bottom. But if you do have questions about boost and turbo, the big thing is be very careful with it. There's so much available timing, and it also gets added to whatever mechanical end belt timing is in the motor, that it can be very dangerous and cause problems, overheating, all that. Most of today's racing uses very little boost or turbo at all, if any boost, none, and maybe a little bit of turbo here and there, because realistically the speed controls and motor have gotten so good that you don't need all of this magic. But it's still there because it's very cool and it works awesome. So if you ever get in a situation where you run out of gears or you can't get a quicker motor or whatever the case may be, these settings can be a lot of fun, but also real tricky. Data record, that is the data recording features that it has. It does the maximum speed control temperature, the maximum motor temperature, your minimum battery voltage, and your logged highest RPM. And that's per run, so power cycle. So if you want to see that stuff, you want to read it and make sure that you note all that. You can also change the profile of your various profiles, which is nice because if you have for hot swapping, you don't like the names that are in there, you can change all that, because all the profiles are just combinations of settings that are defaulted. And you can find a chart in the manual that shows you what all those are. You can see them all, through the settings here. But you could change all of that and put your own names on them and, pictures for different applications and stuff like that also. So there you have it. That is a semi-brief rundown on all the settings and features that come in the XR10 Pro G2, some of the updates from the new firmware as compared to the old one, how all that stuff works, when you may not want to use it. If you do have any questions, please feel free to drop us an email, northamerica@hobbywing.com. If we don't reply to your comments down below, we do try to address them, but if you can, shoot us an email, northamerica@hobbywing.com. We'll get you straightened out right away. Thanks a lot.